Okay, Martin, welcome to the Healthpath podcast, and thank you for sparing some time this morning to come and chat.
Oh yeah, pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
No, it's gonna be fun. So obviously, the intention of today is just to really introduce you as a member of the Healthpath team, to learn a little bit about your backstory, and then we're gonna touch on prebiotics and the role they can play within gut health, and I guess a little bit around systemic health as well. So to start, would you like just to sort of introduce yourself, the role that you play within the team, and then I guess a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, yes. Maybe if we start at the beginning and we we go
Uh-oh.
from there. um, how far back to go? So yeah, when I left school, I wasn't interested in nutrition, and I think I remember my mum having quite a keen interest in making sure we were eating our vegetables growing up. But that's kind of where my interest ended. When I was 18, I was actually studying sound engineering at uni. And from that, I ended up being in a rock band, in a professional rock band for seven years, getting to sort of travel the world without really seeing much of it. Ending up seeing a lot of different dressing rooms all over the place, but not really taking any sort of interest in health. I'm not sure if many people do when they're 18, 19, but especially adding the element of being in a rock band to the mix. It was
Right.
yeah, wasn't a priority. So I did that for a long time, and got to my mid-20s and just was feeling a bit rubbish. You know, nothing was necessarily wrong with me. I wasn't having digestive issues, for example, but I just wasn't feeling great. So I started to I suppose experiment with different things, things like eating more vegetables again, or getting to bed on time. You know, those really outlandish things you expect rock musicians to do. So and I just started feeling a lot better for it. You know, quite surprisingly, you know, how those things started to make me feel a lot more energetic. My mood was better, my sleep was better, and that led me back to college. You know, I think with a lot of information we can find out there, whether it's in books or on blogs, it can be really confusing and contradictory in places. So I kind of wanted to get back into the textbooks and learn about a bit about the biology and some of the research, and to take a bit of the spin off of what people might be pushing through different angles, whether it's a vegan diet or a paleo diet or the best type of diet for gut health. You know, what does the research say, and how do you dig a little bit deeper to get the truth, you know, whatever that might mean for different people. But to get into the research a little bit more was the main focus, and not even to go into practice. That wasn't the initial aim. It was just I just felt quite passionate about learning about it.
Oh, wow.
And it, luckily enough, by the time the course finished, it was amazing. I really felt very lucky to have found something I was so passionate about.
Mm.
So I qualified, I think, coming up to 5 years now from C&M. And over the past few years, I've been gradually moving over to my primary focus being on digestive issues. You know, so primarily IBS and inflammatory bowel diseases. But increasingly as well, with the amount of research that's coming out, starting to see more people not just with gut issues, but issues that we can relate back to the gut. You know, so skin issues, mood related issues. You know, if everything is starting with the digestive system, and so much research is linking all this back to the microbiome and the role that plays in not just gut health, but, you know, systemic health. What are the angles and what are the tools that we can use to support somebody, you know, through their gut?
Yeah, amazing. It must have been quite an influence then in regards to the improvements that you felt with those changes, for you to then feel the desire to go and study nutrition, especially without the intention of then necessarily going and making that your career.
I think so. I think speaking to other practitioners and yourself as well, it's through their own health challenges, you know, digestive issues, for example, and really understanding the consultation process, probably from a more user experience, you know, how it feels to be a patient in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I didn't have that So I was going into it a little bit, I suppose, a little bit blind in some way. But I suppose at the same time, I guess on the other end of that therapeutic spectrum, even though I was relatively well and feeling better from these changes, a member of the family had been diagnosed with a terminal cancer around the same time.
Okay.
And even though we weren't they went to see a practitioner for nutritional support during their therapy. So even though it was a terminal cancer, they went through some treatment as well. And even in that situation, through the changes that they implemented, they felt better. Right. So that kind of showed me the spectrum of what's possible. So if optimizing health or helping somebody feel better, even though it's a terminal condition. And then there's a huge spectrum in between that. That kind of showed me what was possible. So there's a lot that can be done without, in inverted commas, curing somebody.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that still also goes back to digestive issues, because we can do a lot to support people, and there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, so to speak.
Yeah. Excellent.
But that doesn't always mean everything is going to be resolved 100%, but these tools can help people live in inverted commas, a more normal life without these issues impacting, social life. Even taking a trip in the car to see family can sometimes be a bit of the risk for some people if they've got quite urgent bowel movements. So giving people quality of life is a big part of the process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's actually a really key point. Ultimately, it's kind of getting an understanding of what people truly want, what is a successful outcome, what are their expectations, and trying to really understand that actually sometimes it is those small improvements in quality of life which are the huge wins ultimately. And within that, I guess, when we're talking about gut health, when we're talking about bowel movements, when we're talking about the impact that gut health has on systemic health, one of the interventions we can use to modify the microbiome are obviously prebiotics. So Martin, do you want to, introduce what prebiotics are and the different types and how we can start to, utilize these or supplement these or eat these to benefit the microbiome?
Yeah. I suppose even to go back half a step. So at Healthpath, my role is really to...
Yes.
What do I do? I receive people's symptom surveys and their test results, and I will put a plan together based on those. So a personalized program based on the individual situation and what their stool results, their SIBO breath test results are looking at. And these are the cases where we can start using certain interventions, nutraceuticals, which is a bit of a supplements essentially. How can we start nudging things back in the right direction? Because often it's not uncommon really for people to start coming to see us when they've had things set out of balance, and especially things like antibiotics can be a real triggering event for people with digestive issues. And these are a huge wallop to the microbiome. They're a bit of a carpet bomb, and there can be some residual damage from that as the gut is trying to rebalance itself. So instead of going in with quite a heavy-handed approach, it's really about how can we start nudging things back in the right direction. So trying to bring things back into balance is where certain supplements can be helpful, and there's different, I suppose, tiers we can put the supplements into. How can we use what is going to be least damaging and most beneficial to the gut? Because herbs, antimicrobial herbs, are sometimes needed, but if we can focus on nourishing the gut, how is that going to bring things back into balance, rather than using things which are going to potentially lead to some sort of further imbalance, such as quite high strength antimicrobial herbs. So the strictest definition of prebiotics is a fermentable, I think it's a fermentable carbohydrate that selectively feeds bacteria with beneficial outcomes to the host. right? Something like
Sounds
that.
good.
So what does that mean, Alex? Well, like humans don't have a huge amount of ability to digest fibers, really. Certain carbohydrates aren't digestible to humans, so they pass through the small intestine intact. And they make their way down to the large intestine, which is where we have the highest concentration of these beneficial bacteria. So we can eat certain fibers, things like fibers that are going to be in things like garlic, onions, lentils, beans. They're going to pass through the small intestine, end up in the large intestine, where these bacteria feast on them. They have a lovely time. We've got this. We've evolved with these bacteria, and they've really. It's an agreement we've come to with them. You know, we give them a roof over their head, a nice, dark, smelly, moist environment, and we keep them fed with these fibers, and then they give us compounds in exchange. As a result of this fermentation, they start releasing compounds which we can use for our health. So the prebiotics in foods, I think the strictest. Let me get this straight in my head before I blurt it out. So we want to use certain prebiotics to bring the gut back into balance, essentially, and these fall into different categories. And the most common ones that we tend to use at Healthpath really is a partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is quite a new one to the scene, really. I think when I've been working with people in the past and they've tried prebiotics, there's certain ones that have been marketed for a longer period of time, probably inulin or inulin phos, which is the fructooligosaccharides, and that can be quite aggravating for people with digestive issues. Can cause quite a lot of bloating. It's feeding bacteria which are gas producers. So it can be, if someone's getting digestive symptoms like bloating or urgency to go to the loo, that can be like adding more fuel to the fire. So as soon as I start suggesting prebiotics to somebody and they've already tried the inulin, they're like, oh, hang on a second, I've been here before. I don't want to anger the system again. But with the partially hydrolyzed guar gum, that's starting to feed different types of bacteria that don't actually produce gas. And probably in about 95% of people tolerate this really well. You know, there's always a few people that do seem to react to quite a few things. So we can call that PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, quite a mouthful. So the PHGG starts feeding really specific types of microbiome regulating bacteria. And when we're thinking about bringing things back into balance, if we can nourish our own if we can nourish certain microbes that regulate the microbiome, kind of think of this about applying a gentle pressure to certain areas of the microbiome, and that's the nudge. That's the therapeutic nudge we can think of. So if someone's had a stool test and it's shown quite low butyrate producing bacteria, you know, the partially hydrolyzed guar gum has been shown to increase butyrate production. Butyrate is one of the main fuel sources for the cells that line the gut. So with a lot of the cells in our body, we get the nutrition from the blood supply. You know, through the capillaries, we'll go to different parts of the body. But with the cells that line the gut, most of the nutrition actually comes from inside the lumen, so inside the piping. So certain bacteria are going to ferment, for example, this partially hydrolyzed guar gum. They produce this compound called butyric acid, which is a short chain fatty acid, which has really beneficial anti-inflammatory, immune regulating capabilities, but it's also the main fuel source for the cells that line the gut. So for increasing the integrity and the strength of the gut lining, as well as reducing inflammation. So that's a nice one. We use that one quite a lot, and in studies using it alongside certain I think there's one study where they used actually alongside antibiotics for reducing or for treating SIBO essentially, and just using the antibiotic by itself, I think had about a 56% success rate. But combining the antibiotic with the PHGG, it was up to I think around 80%. So the combination of the two seems to have quite a marked improvement in success rates of different protocols. And I think that can be translated into what we're using when we're using antimicrobial herbs for treating or supporting something such as SIBO. Yeah. So it tends to be quite a foundational part of most protocols for me, having that amount of fiber going in. Because really, if somebody's on a low FODMAP diet, they're on a low prebiotic diet. Right. You know, we've taken out these fermentable sources of carbohydrates, so the garlic, onions, beans, are really problematic for a lot of people. You know, potentially it's because there's an excess amount of bacteria in the small intestine in SIBO, but also there can be some sort of visceral hypersensitivity, which is quite a common thing with IBS, where the cells that line the gut have become oversensitive. So even a normal amount of gas that is being produced from eating beans, onions, is actually going to feel quite excruciating for somebody with digestive issues and this visceral hypersensitivity. Even with the PHGG, interesting studies as well about it helping normalize bowel movements. So even for people with constipation or people with diarrhea, again, both ends of the spectrum, it can be really helpful at actually normalizing both, because it's addressing that foundational imbalance. Rather than seeing each digestive condition as a separate entity, it can be a common imbalance that can lead to both. So focusing on nourishing the beneficial bacteria is often the first area we can look to support, rather than just going in with a flamethrower with quite high dose antimicrobial herbs. Yeah, there's definitely a place for those, but it's not always what we want to focus on from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I see it is, it's, you know, quite often taking a multi-pronged approach, but certainly potentially using lower doses of antimicrobials alongside these pro and prebiotics, because for those that aren't aware, as well as prebiotics showing to be effective alongside antibiotics in the eradication of SIBO, obviously there is research indicating that probiotics on themselves can be effective at helping the eradication of SIBO. So we've got quite a few tools in our toolbox that we can also use simultaneously to help, as you say, kind of nudge the microbiome back into a healthier state. Do you remember I'm going to put you on the spot, Martin. Do you remember off the top of your head, in the paper looking at PHGG and antibiotics, did they theorize around any mechanisms around why using prebiotics alongside antibiotics is more successful?
I think originally there was the idea that, I'm not sure if this was actually in the conclusion of the paper, but they were thinking that when bacteria aren't being fed, so when we're not feeding them with prebiotics, they go into, I think it's called a senescent state, which is like a sleep state, where they're not reproducing. And if a cell isn't reproducing, it's harder to kill. So the idea was, if we're feeding with prebiotics, the bacteria are replicating more, which makes them more susceptible to the antimicrobial therapies. Right. I'm not sure if that has actually stood up to scrutiny. But what the interesting thing is that we're even just using the guargan by itself, the PHGG by itself, it's actually again shown to normalize bowel movements, and that's just using it in isolation. Okay. So the fact that it's increasing the butyrate producing bacteria as well as bifidobacteria, you know, so those are the two main groups it's looking to nourish. I think a lot of it does come back down to how helpful it is increasing the amount of butyric acid, because that compound also helps to regulate the types of cells and the peristalsis through the gut. So it's a signaling molecule as well. Right. So it helps to regulate the movement of the muscle contractions and regulate bowel movements in that manner. Yeah, so I think that's the original sort of conclusion has maybe been expanded upon.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. and certainly makes sense. You know, it's what I've heard some people sort of speculate around. Excellent. Okay. And is there anything else that is worth mentioning when on the topic of prebiotics? Is there anything you've read around maybe the role they can play in specific conditions, maybe whether inside or outside the gut?
Yeah, I mean, even other prebiotics, one called GOS, galacto-oligosaccharides, and often using a product called Bimuno, which is a different type of prebiotic fiber, which has slightly different actions. I think even going back to, I suppose, just touching on the low FODMAP diet for a period, you know, I think that's quite potentially becoming a bit more of a controversial diet to put people on from the get-go. You know, it's quite a restrictive diet, and a really important point to make is that often food isn't the issue. You know, food, we're not looking to find the most restrictive. We're not looking to find the most perfect version of a restricted diet for somebody to live the rest of their life on. The ultimate aim is to have a diet as healthy but as carefree as possible. You know, not to have it as a stress. So a low FODMAP diet long term has been shown to reduce sort of diversity in the microbiome. So that's an important point to consider. So even some studies using this Bimuno have shown that it's as effective as a low FODMAP diet. So instead of focusing all on the diet, how can we again address the underlying imbalance? So one sachet, I think it's 3.5 grams of the galacto-oligosaccharides has been shown to be as effective as a low FODMAP diet. And even when that is stopped, there has been an ongoing benefit from that. Not an indefinite benefit, but it's helping to rebalance the foundational issue. In studies with this, looking at the gut, that sort of doses can be effective. And also, but it's important to build up to that slowly, because that has a bit more potential to cause bloating and quite a lot of flatulence in people. So it's always good to have that as a little bit of an asterisk next to that. I've had a few people's partners comment on the amounts of gas they've been producing unsuspectingly. But even with that, you know, the dose that we're using these prebiotics at can have quite an impact as well. You know, so doubling the dose of the galacto-oligosaccharides has been shown to have quite a marked improvement on anxiety levels as well. So it's not just the gut. It's often what we're seeing is that once the cells that line the gut have had their fill of these short chain fatty acids, so things like the butyric acid, there's an overspill. If there's excess being produced, they go into general circulation. And one of the roles they play is actually helping calm the central nervous system. They can travel to the brain and have a very calming effect, which is why these higher doses can be quite helpful for those types of situations.
Right.
I think in this study I'm thinking of, not many people continued with that high dose because they went in with it very quickly. So even though their anxiety may have been better, their bloating was horrendous.
Okay.
Which I guess you've got to pick which one which is most troubling. But if we can build up to that dose, that gives the gut some time to adapt. So starting with quite a low dose and building up gradually. Whether that's even within some people, you know, an eighth of that recommended sort of 3.5 grams, and building up over a period of maybe a month, maybe 2 months. If we can't just go in with what the box says all the time, you know, what the recommended serving or dosage is by the supplier, but what does the research say, and how do we actually get people up to that dose in a more of a personalized way as well, because there isn't a one size fits all to any of this. Each person's IBS is very unique. There may be commonalities, but it's about trying to figure it out over a period of time, and to unpeel the onion, you know, so to speak. You know, we take one layer off, move one step further forward. How's that? What does it look like under that layer of skin? then we try and take the next layer off. So steady progress, and prebiotics can be used in that way to just slowly increase the dose and put that foundational support in.
Excellent. Yeah, I think two really important points to sort of reiterate there are the role that prebiotics can play in conditions such as IBS in comparison to something like the low FODMAP diet. I think that's some really interesting research, and kind of aligns with some of the yoga-based interventions, which have also shown similar improvements in IBS symptoms compared to a low FODMAP diet. So again, it's really not all food, and there are lots of other things we can consider to get improvement in these conditions. What was the second one that I wanted to reiterate?
Let's rewind. Let's go.
Yeah. But also to emphasize, to give you an alternative experience. I will always remember when I first went on Bimuno, because two really noticeable things for me were a massive improvement in bloating, going straight in at the right dose. So while we want to be mindful, some of us will be really great with kind of the 3.5 grams or 1 sachet. And also mood. I definitely noticed improvement in my mood. And I don't think I can be specific about it, but sort of just my general well-being, my sort of outlook seems to be slightly more positive. And yeah, I guess positive is probably the best word to use. It was a really interesting sort of process to go through ultimately. So it shows you that kind of gut-brain connection that we so often talk about these days.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, and I think it's just such an interesting area where we can have this other tool in the toolbox. And I think that maybe, as I mentioned at the start, more people are probably getting in contact with Healthpath who don't have digestive issues, but have some symptoms that can be related back to the digestive system. Yeah. And potentially they feel like they've exhausted a lot of other avenues. Maybe they've had lots of tests done through the NHS and all the results have come back indicating they're very healthy, even though they don't feel very healthy. So how else can we support people? And there are many tools in the toolbox where we can look to bring things back into balance, because a lot of the time people can have digestive imbalances without having digestive symptoms, or microbiome imbalances rather than without having digestive symptoms.
Yeah.
So even having a low-grade inflammation in the gut can have systemic consequences.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay. And is there anything else that you feel is just worth touching on the topic of prebiotics? Anything that we've missed?
I mean, we did do a long podcast on this. But I think they're just a really fascinating area, because the main indicator of gut health is really the diversity of plants someone is able to tolerate. And if they're on a long-term low FODMAP diet, I always think, I can't remember which Indiana Jones movie it was. Maybe it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. But there's that scene towards the end where there's like a bag of gold on a thing, and he takes like a statue and he swaps it for a bag of dirt or something. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I don't remember that.
There's like a pressure pad on this ancient ruin. And that's what I always kind of think of prebiotics like. We're taking the higher FODMAP foods out to help someone feel more comfortable, but can we replace that with something that's better tolerated? We need to insert like a little clip of the movie now into the video. So if a lot of these compounds are coming out, the higher FODMAP foods, which are really beneficial to gut health, because really the ultimate aim is to get a lot of these higher FODMAP foods in, not just cutting them out for all time. We do see that if someone's been on a very restrictive low FODMAP diet for a long period of time, it can actually be harder for them to reintroduce foods. And not in a perverse sort of way that I enjoy people suffering, but it's an important aspect that somebody is actually still having symptoms when you're working with them, because we want to kind of see what we're doing is helping. You know, are you having bloating on a daily basis? Okay, can we maybe reduce some of the most problematic foods? So rather than going full low FODMAP, can we just reduce the biggest hitters? Garlic, onions, beans, lentils, maybe wheat as well. To get that person maybe feeling 50% better, you know, just take that first step forward. And then using what is left over symptomatically as a sort of daily gauge to mark against how our interventions are benefiting.
Yeah.
So having using the prebiotics to replace these other highly fermentable beneficial foods is a really key area, I think, because it can help improve how well someone responds to the protocols.
Absolutely. Brilliant. No, I think there's been some really key considerations and themes there that I'm sure we'll expand on through the journey of the Healthpath podcast. You know, the role that things other than diets can play within improving gut health is going to be a really big one, I think. And obviously we've done a pretty good job today, Martin, or you have, of expanded on this topic of prebiotics and the role that they can play, and really why they are such a core component of many Healthpath programs ultimately. So thank you very much for coming on. It's nice to be able to introduce you to our community of listeners, which hopefully will be expanding day by day. And we'll get you back on at some point soon to explore other areas of gut health.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. And I mean, that's the interesting thing about gut health, is that it's such an expanding topic. There's always going to be something new to talk about, probably by lunchtime.
Yeah. What's the paper?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Martin.
You're welcome. Take care.